Greetings to you on the Fear Files channel. Today we'll immerse ourselves in one of the most shocking and tragic stories of modern America, the case of Ariel Castro. This is a story about three women who spent more than 10 years in captivity, about a monster hiding behind the mask of an ordinary person, and about an incredible escape that seemed impossible. Get comfortable, because this story will turn upside down your understanding of how dangerous the most ordinary people can be. Cleveland, Ohio. The Tremont neighborhood, a typical American working-class district. Small houses, neat lawns, neighbors who know each other by name. 2207 Seymour Avenue, an unremarkable two-story yellow house. Right here, in the very heart of an ordinary neighborhood, something unimaginable was happening for 10 years. But let's start from the very beginning, from the moment when three young women disappeared one after another, leaving their families in desperation and uncertainty. August 21st, 2002, Michelle Knight, a 21-year-old girl, was heading to a meeting with social services. The matter concerned custody of her son. For Michelle, this meeting was critically important. She desperately wanted to get her child back, but she never reached her destination. Michelle grew up in a dysfunctional family and experienced a difficult childhood. By the time of her abduction, she had already faced many life difficulties. Perhaps that's why her disappearance didn't receive the attention it deserved. The police quickly closed the case, assuming that Michelle simply ran away. After all, she was an adult woman, and her life was far from ideal. Many decided that she couldn't handle the pressure and just left. Even her own family began to lose hope. But the truth was completely different. On that August day, Michelle met someone she knew, a family friend, the father of her brother's classmate. His name was Ariel Castro. He offered her a ride, and Michelle, not suspecting the danger, agreed. This decision changed her life forever. Almost a year passed. On April 21st, 2003, the day before her 17th birthday, Amanda Berry disappeared. Unlike Michelle, Amanda's disappearance caused enormous public resonance. Amanda was an ordinary American girl from a loving family. She worked at a local Burger King, was a good daughter, had friends, plans for the future. After her shift at work, she called her sister and said that someone had offered her a ride. That was the last time anyone spoke with her. Amanda's mother, Lawana Berry, began desperate searches. She distributed flyers, gave interviews, appeared on television shows. Amanda's story was broadcast across the country. The case even appeared on the show America's Most Wanted. But all efforts seemed in vain. Amanda seemed to have vanished in a thin air. In reality, she was just a few blocks from home, in the basement of that very house on Seymour Avenue. Now Michelle Knight had a companion in misfortune. Tragically, Amanda's mother, Lawana, died in 2006, never learning what happened to her daughter. She died of heart failure, which many attributed to stress and grief from losing her child. April 2nd, 2004. 14-year-old Gina DeJesus was returning home from middle school. She was a close friend of Ariel Castro's daughter, Arlene. They studied together, and Gina often visited the Castro house. That day, Gina was walking home on her usual route. She was last seen at the corner of West 105th Street and Lorraine Avenue, just a few blocks from home. Gina's disappearance shocked the entire neighborhood. She was only 14, a child. Her face appeared everywhere, on posters, on television, in newspapers. The DeJesus family didn't stop for a minute. Her father, Felix, organized search groups, actions, marches. The Tremont neighborhood united in searching for the girl. Ariel Castro Gina's friend's father, even participated in search events. He distributed flyers with Gina's photo, talked to neighbors, expressed sympathy to the family. No one could imagine that he was the one keeping the girl in his house. It was perfect camouflage. Who would suspect a person actively helping in the search? Let's stop and talk about the person behind these crimes. Who is Ariel Castro? Ariel Castro was born in 1960 in Puerto Rico. In childhood, his family moved to Cleveland. Outwardly, his life looked completely ordinary. He worked as a school bus driver, a profession requiring background checks and public trust. He was married and had 4 children. But behind closed doors, Castro was a completely different person. His ex-wife, Grimilda Figueroa, suffered domestic violence for years. He beat her, broke her bones, once even broke her nose. In 1993, Grimilda left him, taking the children. She obtained a restraining order against Castro. His children remembered their father as a cruel tyrant. He locked them in rooms as punishment, sometimes for several days. He was paranoid, controlling every aspect of family life. After the divorce, he lived alone in the house on Seymour Avenue. Neighbors described him as strange, but generally harmless. He played bass in local bands, sometimes played at parties. He was sociable, but not close to anyone. The perfect example of a person who knows how to hide his true face. Psychologists would later try to understand what turned him into a monster. Was it the result of his own traumatic childhood? Or was he simply born without empathy? Perhaps we'll never know the complete answer. But one thing is clear. Ariel Castro was a predator who carefully planned his crimes. All 3 abductions followed a similar pattern, indicating that Castro was acting according to a well-thought-out plan. He chose vulnerable victims, young girls or women who were walking on foot in relatively deserted places. He used his car and offered rides. It's important to note that all 3 victims knew him, or at least had seen him before. This created a false sense of security. Michelle Knight knew him as a family friend. Amanda Berry may have recognized him as a school bus driver. Gina DeJesus was best friends with his daughter and often visited his house. Castro used trust. He wasn't a stranger jumping out of a dark alley. He was a familiar face offering help. Once the victim was in the car, he brought them to Seymour Avenue under the pretext of stopping by his house for a minute. Once inside, the girls could no longer escape. Castro immediately used force, tied them up, and locked them in a room. This was a cold, calculated approach. Castro didn't act impulsively. He was hunting. Now, the hardest part of our story. What happened inside the house is difficult even to imagine. The house on Seymour Avenue looked ordinary from the outside. A 2-story building, a small yard, nothing remarkable. But inside, Castro had created a real prison. All windows were boarded up or covered with heavy curtains. Doors were reinforced with additional locks and chains. Some doors had several locks installed, requiring different keys. Castro was the only one who had all the keys. The women were kept in different rooms on the 2nd floor and in the basement. Most often they were chained to walls or radiators. The chains are long enough to allow them to move within a small space, but not long enough to reach windows or doors. There was no natural light in the rooms. The women lost track of time, not knowing whether it was day or night. This was a form of psychological torture, complete disorientation. Castro systematically subjected the women to physical and sexual abuse. He came to them on a schedule, often unpredictably. This unpredictability created a constant state of fear and anxiety. Michelle Knight, as the first abducted, was subjected to particularly cruel treatment. She was older than the others, and apparently Castro saw less value in her. She was forced to help with Amanda's childbirth, used as an intermediary between Castro and the other women. Michelle became pregnant several times during the years of captivity. Each time Castro forcibly terminated the pregnancy, beating her, starving her, or using physical force. According to her own words, she experienced at least 5 pregnancies that ended in miscarriages due to Castro's actions. Food was minimal and irregular. Sometimes Castro fed them once every few days. This was another method of control, keeping them physically weak. Sanitary conditions were horrifying. The women were often not allowed to use a normal bathroom. They were kept in conditions that can only be described as inhumane. Physical suffering was only part of the nightmare. Psychological torture was perhaps even more destructive. Castro played psychological games with his victims. He sometimes showed them news reports about their searches, demonstrating that the world continued to live without them, that their families had despaired. This was done to break their spirit, to convince them that there would be no rescue. He told them that their families had stopped searching, that they were forgotten. This was a lie, but in isolation, without access to information, it was difficult not to believe. Castro manipulated the women against each other. He created situations where they could envy each other's privileges or blame each other for their suffering. This is a classic tactic of jailers: divide and conquer. Sometimes he showed relative kindness, gave slightly better food, allowed them to watch TV, loosened chains. This created a phenomenon known as traumatic bonding or Stockholm Syndrome. Victims began to value the slightest manifestations of humanity, which further strengthened the abductor's control. Castro was paranoid. He constantly checked locks, listened for any sounds. He threatened the women that if they tried to scream or attract attention, he would kill not only them, but also their families. These threats worked. Even when neighbors were nearby, the women were afraid to call for help. Especially tragically, there were cases when help was very close, but fear stopped the victims from acting. 2006 became a turning point in captivity. Amanda Berry became pregnant. Unlike Michelle's pregnancies, which Castro brutally terminated, he decided to allow this pregnancy to continue. December 25th, 2006, on Christmas, Amanda gave birth to a daughter. The birth took place in the house, without medical help, in unsanitary conditions. It was Michelle Knight who helped deliver the baby, despite lacking medical knowledge and equipment. This was incredibly dangerous. Something could have gone wrong at any moment, and neither mother nor child would have received necessary help. But by some miracle, everything went relatively well, and a healthy girl was born. Amanda named her Jocelyn. Jocelyn's birth changed the dynamics in the house. Now the women had a new goal: to protect this innocent child. For Amanda, her daughter became a source of strength, a reason to continue fighting and hoping. Castro behaved relatively normally with the child. He bought her toys, clothes, sometimes even took her out of the house. Jocelyn was his daughter, and this seemed to evoke some paternal feelings in him that he didn't show to the captives. For the women, the child's presence was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, Jocelyn brought light and hope into their dark world. On the other hand, it was an additional responsibility and another vulnerability that Castro could use for control. While the women suffered in captivity, life outside continued. Their families never stopped searching. Amanda Berry's mother, Luana, devoted the rest of her life to searching for her daughter. She gave interviews every year on the anniversary of Amanda's disappearance. She never lost hope, although many advised her to accept it. Tragically, Luana died in 2006, just a few months after Jocelyn's birth. She died believing her daughter was dead, although Amanda was alive just a few miles from her. This is one of the most heartbreaking details of the entire story. Gina DeJesus's family was equally tireless. Her father, Felix, and mother, Nancy Ruiz, organized the Gina DeJesus Center, a place where families of missing children could receive support and resources. They turned their tragedy into a movement to help others. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, they organized marches and memorial actions. Gina's face was everywhere in the Tremont neighborhood. Her photo remained on lampposts and store windows. Michelle Knight's family, unfortunately, was not as active. Searches for her practically ceased after the first year. This reflected systemic inequality in how society responds to disappearances. Young, attractive girls from good families receive massive media attention. Women with troubled pasts are often ignored. Cleveland police were criticized for how they handled these cases. There were missed leads, unfollowed clues. Neighbors called several times about strange incidents at Castro's house, but this didn't receive proper attention. In 2004, 2 police officers came to Castro's house because he had left a school bus with a child still inside. No one answered the door, and the officers left. They were meters away from 3 kidnapped women. Over the years of captivity, there were several moments when rescue seemed close but slipped away. One day, Castro forgot to lock one of the internal doors. Gina DeJesus tried to escape, but the sound of her attempt to open the main door attracted Castro's attention. The consequences of this escape attempt were brutal. Castro strengthened security measures, adding even more locks and chains. There were moments when the women heard neighbors' voices outside the window. They desperately wanted to scream, but fear paralyzed them. Castro regularly reminded them that if they tried to call for help, he would kill everyone, them and those who came to help. Neighbors sometimes noticed oddities. One neighbor saw a naked woman on all fours with a chain around her neck crawling in one of the rooms. She called the police, but when officers came, Castro didn't open the door and they didn't insist. Records of this call were later lost or improperly filed. Another neighbor heard screams and banging on walls, but decided it was just a family quarrel and didn't intervene. This raises a painful question. How many times could intervention have saved these women earlier? The most tragic oversight was that Castro continued working as a school bus driver until 2012. A man keeping 3 women in slavery drove children to school daily. Sometimes he even brought the bus home, parking it right in front of the house where his victims were imprisoned. How is this possible? How could the system fail so badly? And now we've come to the day that changed everything. May 6th, 2013, began as an ordinary day in the House of Horrors, but it ended quite differently. Castro, usually paranoidly cautious, made a mistake. He left the house, forgetting to lock one of the internal doors. Perhaps he was in a hurry. Perhaps he had simply become overconfident after so many years without incidents. Amanda Berry, who by this time was 27 years old, realized this was her chance. Perhaps the only chance. Her daughter Jocelyn was already 6 years old, and Amanda knew if they didn't escape now, Jocelyn would spend her entire childhood in this nightmare. Amanda approached the front door. The door was locked with several locks and reinforced, but it wasn't as insurmountable as the internal doors. Amanda began to scream, bang on the door, tried to attract someone's attention. "Help! Help me!" she screamed. Across the street, a man named Charles Ramsey was eating a hamburger on his porch. He heard the screams. At first, he thought it was just a domestic dispute, but something in the desperation of that voice made him pay attention. "Help me! I'm stuck here. I can't get out." Amanda continued to scream. Ramsey ran across the street. He saw a woman's hand extended through a small gap at the bottom of the door. "I can't get out. Help me, please." Amanda pleaded. Ramsey, together with another neighbor, Angel Cordero, began trying to open the door. It wouldn't budge. Then they started kicking out the bottom part of the door. Finally, they created an opening large enough for Amanda and her daughter to squeeze through. Amanda got out onto the street, holding Jocelyn in her arms. She was free for the first time in 10 years. The first thing she did was ask for a phone. Ramsey gave her his mobile. With trembling hands, Amanda dialed 911. This call recording would later be heard by millions of people around the world. "Help me. I'm Amanda Berry. Do you need police? Fire or ambulance? I need police." "Okay, and what's the problem?" "I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here. I'm free now." The operator didn't believe at first. It sounded incredible, but there was something in Amanda's voice that convinced him this wasn't a joke. "Are you Amanda Berry?" "That Amanda Berry?" "Yes. And the other girls are here too." Gina DeJesus. Police arrived within minutes. Officers burst into the house and discovered Gina DeJesus and Michelle Knight still locked inside. The nightmare was over. Ariel Castro was arrested a few hours later when he returned home. He didn't resist. News of the three women's liberation spread with incredible speed. Within hours, it became the top news story around the world. For the families, it was a mixed feeling of incredible relief and shock. Gina DeJesus disappeared when she was 14. Now she was 23. Amanda was 16 when kidnapped, now 27. Michelle Knight was 21, now 32. They had lost years of their lives, an entire decade. Felix DeJesus, Gina's father, told reporters, "I never stopped believing. Never. I knew my daughter was alive." Amanda's sister, who never lost hope even after their mother's death, said, "I always knew. I always knew she would come back." The Tremont neighborhood was shocked. People who had lived near Castro's house for years couldn't believe that all this time such things were happening there. Charles Ramsey, the neighbor who helped Amanda escape, gave an interview that went viral. "I knew something was wrong when a little white girl runs into a black man's arms. Something's definitely wrong." His humor in such a difficult situation was a way to cope with shock. He became an instant celebrity, although he himself insisted he wasn't a hero. "I just did what any person should have done." When police began investigating the house on Seymour Avenue, they discovered the extent of the horror that had occurred there. The house was a real prison. Investigators found chains and locks everywhere, rooms with boarded windows, minimal sanitary conditions, evidence of physical abuse, diaries and notes that some women kept. Medical examinations of the victims revealed extensive physical and psychological trauma. All three women were emaciated and traumatized. Michelle Knight had partial hearing loss in one ear due to blows. The psychological scars were even deeper. Years of isolation, abuse, and manipulation left an indelible mark on their psyche. Ariel Castro was charged with 977 counts, including kidnapping, rape, assault, and murder. Yes, murder, because the forced termination of Michelle Knight's pregnancies qualified as murder of unborn children. Police also arrested Castro's two brothers, Pedro and Anel, who also lived nearby. But it soon became clear that they had nothing to do with the crimes, and they were released. Ariel acted alone. The investigation also raised questions about why police couldn't solve this case earlier. Records were found of neighbor calls that didn't receive proper attention. There were missed opportunities, improperly filed reports. The Cleveland Police Department was harshly criticized. They later acknowledged errors in the investigation, but this couldn't return the lost years to the victims. The Ariel Castro case became one of the most high-profile trials in Ohio history. The entire country followed the developments. At first, Castro pleaded not guilty. His lawyers tried to use an insanity defense, claiming he suffered from mental disorders and couldn't control his actions. But psychiatric evaluation showed that Castro was completely sane. He understood the nature of his actions and their consequences. He wasn't insane, he was evil. In July 2013, to avoid the death penalty, Castro agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole plus 1,000 years. During the sentencing on August 1st, 2013, Castro was given the opportunity to speak before the court. What he said shocked everyone present. Instead of remorse, Castro stated, "I'm not a monster. I'm sick. I have an addiction, like an alcoholic has an addiction to alcohol." He tried to minimize his crimes, claiming that most of the time the women lived in harmony. He even stated that he never beat these women the way I beat my wife. This was outrageous. He showed not a drop of genuine remorse or understanding of the extent of the suffering he caused. Fortunately, the victims got the opportunity to speak. Michelle Knight, the oldest and most affected, read a powerful statement before the court. "You took 11 years of my life away. I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. I spent 11 years enduring your every whim and walk. I know I will survive. I can say that you will die a small, insignificant death. I will prevail. I will not let you define me and who I am. You stopped me from living, and that's exactly what I intend to do from this day forward. My name is Michelle Knight, and I am free." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. This fragile woman who had survived unimaginable horrors stood before her tormentor and refused to be a victim. She was reclaiming her power. Judge Michael Russo sentenced Castro to life imprisonment plus 1,000 years without the possibility of parole. He said, "You say you have an addiction. Addiction is not an excuse. You say the victims were happy and had a good life. Nothing could be further from the truth." Castro was sent to the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio, to begin serving his sentence. But he didn't spend much time there. On September 3rd, 2013, just a month after sentencing, Ariel Castro was found dead in his prison cell. The official cause of death, suicide by hanging. He used a bedsheet to hang himself. Guard discovered him during a routine check, but it was already too late. Castro's death provoked mixed reactions. Some considered it a cowardly escape from responsibility. He avoided decades in prison that he deserved. He deprived his victims of the opportunity to know he was suffering as they had suffered. Others believed it was justice of a kind. He couldn't live with what he had done, or rather, couldn't live with the consequences of his exposure. There were also conspiracy theories that it wasn't suicide, but murder. Some prisoners are extremely hostile to criminals who harm women and children. But the official investigation confirmed suicide. Security camera footage showed Castro acted alone. Michelle Knight released a statement after his death. You saved me from having to face you again. You saved me the stress and anxiety. For the victims, Castro's death meant the final closing of one chapter. There would be no more court hearings, appeals, interviews with him in prison. The monster was dead. Now, they could focus on healing. After Castro's arrest, the question arose, what to do with the house at 2207 Seymour Avenue? The victims were unanimous. The house must be destroyed. They didn't want it to become a pilgrimage site for the morbidly curious. They didn't want their nightmare to turn into a tourist attraction. The city of Cleveland agreed. On August 7th, 2013, just a few days after Castro's sentencing, they began demolishing the house. It was a symbolic act. The yellow house that had kept dark secrets for so long was turned into rubble. Each strike of the excavator was a blow to the past, a step toward healing. Hundreds of people gathered to watch the demolition. Some applauded when the walls began to fall. It was cathartic not only for the victims, but for the entire community. Grass was planted on the side of the house. No memorial, no plaque, just an empty plot of land. This was what the survivors wanted. They didn't want this place to be defined by what happened there. And what happened to the three women after their liberation? Michelle Knight, who suffered the most, decided to completely change her identity. She took a new name, Lily Rose Lee, to symbolize her rebirth. She wrote a memoir titled Finding Me, where she told her story in her own words. Michelle spoke openly about her experience, hoping to help other trauma survivors. She became an advocate for crime victims, using her story to inspire others toward survival and recovery. Her relationship with her family was complicated. The fact that her searches were quickly discontinued left deep wounds. But she worked on healing and forgiveness. Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus decided to stick together. They wrote joint memoirs titled Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland, published in 2015. Both women chose a more private life compared to Michelle. They gave a limited number of interviews and mainly focused on reconnecting with their families. Amanda focused on raising Jocelyn, who amazingly turned out to be a relatively normal, healthy child, considering the circumstances of her birth and early years of life. Amanda protected her daughter's privacy, rarely allowing her to appear publicly. Gina reunited with her family and began working with the Gina DeJesus Center, the organization her family created during her disappearance. The center helps families of missing people and continues to do important work. All three women went through intensive therapy. They suffered from PTSD, anxiety, depression, normal reactions to extreme trauma. Healing was a slow and nonlinear process, but they survived. They didn't just survive, they returned to life. The Ariel Castro case led to important changes in how police and society respond to missing persons cases. The Cleveland Police Department reformed its procedures for investigating missing persons cases. They created a specialized unit to work on such cases. They improved methods for tracking leads and ensured that every missing person report receives proper attention. The case also highlighted the problem of missing white woman syndrome, a phenomenon where disappearances of attractive young, white middle-class women receive disproportionately more media attention, while cases of women of color, poor women, or women with troubled pasts are ignored. Michelle Knight became the face of this problem. Her case was essentially closed because she didn't fit the profile of the perfect victim. This led to a national conversation about how all victims deserve equal attention and resources. There are also conversations about how neighbors and communities can better protect the vulnerable. The principle of see something, say something was reinforced. People were urged to trust their instincts and report suspicious activity. Castro's house was filled with red flags, boarded windows, strange sounds, his paranoid behavior. But no one put these pieces together. If even one person had insisted on a more thorough investigation, perhaps the women would have been rescued earlier. Experts tried to understand Ariel Castro's psychology. What turns a person into such a monster? Psychologists noted several factors. Need for control. Castro was extremely controlling. His ex-wife described how he controlled every aspect of her life. After the divorce, he lost that control, and perhaps the kidnappings were a way to regain it. Lack of empathy. Castro demonstrated classic signs of psychopathy. Inability to feel empathy for his victims, to see them as people with their own rights and feelings. Sexual deviance. His crimes had a strong sexual component, indicating deep sexual disorders and a need to dominate. Narcissism. His statements in court showed extreme narcissism. He saw himself as a victim of his addiction, unable to take true responsibility for his actions. But psychological explanations don't justify. Many people experience difficult childhoods, have psychological problems, struggle with control, and don't become kidnappers and rapists. Ultimately, Ariel Castro made choices. Every day for 10 years, he chose to continue causing pain. These were his decisions, his responsibility. Today, more than 10 years after their liberation, the three women continue their lives. Their stories have become symbols of survival, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit. They showed that even after unimaginable trauma, healing is possible. But it's important to remember that they're not just survivors. They're full-fledged people with complex identities, dreams, goals. They don't need to be defined only through the prism of what happened to them. Michelle Lilly found love, got married. She pursues her passions and lives the life she chooses. Amanda is raising her daughter, who is now a teenager. She gave Jocelyn a normal life, full of love and stability. Gina works to help other missing children, turning her tragedy into positive change. Their stories also remind us of the importance of never giving up. Amanda and Gina's families never stopped believing, never stopped searching. Their persistence kept the cases in public consciousness. And ultimately, it was Amanda Berry's courage, her decision to risk everything on that May Day in 2013, that freed them all. She could have stayed quiet, could have been afraid that Castro would return and punish her. But she chose action. She chose freedom. The story of Ariel Castro is one of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history. It's a story about monstrous cruelty, systemic failures, missed opportunities, and lost years. But it's also a story about incredible strength, survival, and hope. Three women survived something most of us can't even imagine. And they didn't just survive, they recovered, they're thriving. Their story teaches us several critical lessons. First, predators often hide in plain sight. They're your neighbors, colleagues, people society trusts. We must be vigilant and trust our instincts. Second, all victims deserve equal attention and resources. It shouldn't matter what your social status, race, or background is. Every life is valuable. Third, never give up. Amanda and Gina's families continued searching for years when many had already lost hope. Their persistence mattered. Fourth, the human spirit is incredibly resilient. Even after extreme trauma, healing is possible. A full life is possible. When we tell this story, It's important to remember that at its center is not the monster Ariel Castro, but three remarkable women who refuse to be defined by their trauma. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. Their names and their strength are what we should remember. The house on Seymour Avenue no longer exists. It was erased from the face of the earth, as it should be. But the memory of what happened there and the lesson we learned must remain. This was a story for the Fear Files channel. If it touched you, if it made you think about safety in your own community, if it inspired you to be more vigilant, more compassionate, more persistent, then we've accomplished our task. Thank you for being with us on this difficult but important journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the Fear Files channel so you don't miss other stories that shock, teach, and remind us of the dark sides of human nature and of the light that can break through even the deepest darkness. Remember, hope exists. Survival is possible. And sometimes, even in the most terrible circumstances, there are those brave enough to cry out for help and change everything. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. See you in the next episode of Fear Files.